She's gone from being a vilified royal mistress to the woman who will now shape the future of the monarchy. Camilla Parker Bowles has come a long way in the eyes of her nation and the world.
The meeting was supposed to end with signatures, quiet handshakes, and another royal matter disappearing behind palace doors. Instead, Queen Camilla pushed back her chair, stared across the table in disbelief, and walked out before the final words were even finished. The Privy Council had transferred control of the Queen Mother's disputed estate interests to Princess Anne, and Camilla's reaction made clear that this was far more than a question of property. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move at first. She kept one hand near her ring while the final decision was read, then asked whether the ruling was truly final. The Privy Council, a formal body of senior advisors that approves certain royal and state matters, had formally placed the Queen Mother's remaining private estate holdings, heritage assets, and long-term custodial authority under Anne's control. That meant the princess was not simply receiving property. She was receiving responsibility for possessions tied to family memory, inherited duty, and the private legacy of an older royal generation. Anne refused to react. Princess Anne kept both hands still against the table and gave no sign of triumph, because she understood exactly how easily a legal transfer could become a personal humiliation. Camilla looked toward her only once, but the silence between them carried years of tension. The Queen had expected influence over parts of that legacy. Now she was being told, in front of the woman who would inherit control, that her role had ended before she had even been consulted. Then, the final clause landed. A documented account of the council session described wording that gave Anne continuing custodial authority over several historically sensitive family items connected directly to the Queen Mother. Camilla stopped turning her ring. She asked again whether any review remained possible. The answer was short. No. Anne said nothing, but her restraint only sharpened the moment, because celebration would have looked cruel and sympathy would have sounded worse. Camilla pushed her chair back. She quietly said she would not remain for the rest of the discussion, turned, and left before anyone could answer. The door closed with enough force to break the silence. King Charles stayed alone where he was. He did not follow his wife, call her back, or demand that the council pause. Instead, Charles looked toward Anne and remained completely still, a reaction that carried its own deeply disturbing message. Camilla's departure shocked the room, but the deeper wound would only become clear once the people around that table confronted what each of them stood to lose, or inherit. Princess Anne had spent decades proving that duty mattered more to her than ceremony, applause, or royal glamour. Yet the inheritance placed before her carried all three things she normally avoided: symbolism, family resentment, and public attention. Queen Camilla faced the opposite reality. Something she believed remained within her sphere had suddenly passed to the one royal woman least likely to surrender it. Anne understood why the council had chosen her. Her reputation rested on discipline and responsibility. The estate transfer, meaning the formal handover of control over property, heirlooms, and custodial duties, therefore carried a clear message. This was not an honorary gesture. Camilla understood that message too. Since becoming queen, she had gained influence over royal households and traditions, so exclusion from a decision involving a senior royal woman felt like a reduction of her standing. Anne sat alone after the meeting and opened the transfer summary again. She reached the page carrying the Queen Mother's name, stopped, and read it twice. There was no satisfaction in her response. She knew accepting the estate could deepen tension inside her brother's household, and she knew Camilla would see every signature as another reminder of what had been taken. Instead of approving the first instruction, the princess closed the folder and left it unsigned. Camilla returned to her private rooms with anger burning beneath the surface. Wealth was not what hurt most. The humiliation came from learning the decision while Anne sat a few places away, composed and silent. Then a private secretary entered with information that changed everything. According to a documented account of that exchange, Charles had been told about the council's direction before the meeting. Camilla's anger shifted. What had felt like conflict with Anne now felt like betrayal by her husband. Anne, meanwhile, refused to move quickly. She told an aide that nothing connected to the Queen Mother's estate was to be moved, catalogued, displayed, or reassigned until she had reviewed every condition attached to the transfer. Her caution mattered because those conditions controlled not only possession, but how family objects could be used and who could make future decisions. Then one clause changed everything. Anne found a restriction buried in the estate terms, a condition written years earlier that sharply limited who could exercise authority over certain inherited assets. Camilla did not yet know its exact wording, but Charles did. Once that restriction surfaced, the transfer stopped looking like a sudden insult and began looking like the consequence of something much older. The restriction buried inside that estate history did not begin with Camilla, but one confrontation years earlier had transformed an old family concern into an irreversible decision. The transfer did not begin inside the Privy Council chamber. Its true origin lay in a private royal dinner months earlier, when a disagreement over one seemingly insignificant heirloom exposed a much larger struggle over who had authority to control the monarchy's inherited family legacy. Those present remembered the evening because Princess Anne rarely raised her voice. That night, however, she placed her glass down and told Camilla one sentence nobody forgot. Camilla had already been pushing for greater order around several possessions linked to the Queen Mother. Some items belonged to private family arrangements, while others carried separate rules over ownership, display, and preservation. Anne understood that stewardship, meaning the responsibility to protect and manage inherited property rather than simply possess it, could easily become confused with status. That mattered because the Queen wanted certain heritage pieces brought under the active royal household, while the princess believed old family wishes should survive whoever currently held influence at the palace. Camilla finally made the proposal at Windsor. She suggested moving one cherished Queen Mother heirloom from its traditional family setting into a redesigned royal display controlled by her household. Anne placed her glass down, looked directly across the table, and answered, "That was entrusted to the family, not to a position." The Queen stiffened. Charles immediately asked both women to stop, but his attempt at neutrality satisfied neither of them. Camilla heard weakness in his restraint. Anne heard proof that informal understandings were no longer enough. The dinner never recovered. Camilla left early, convinced the princess had challenged her authority in front of Charles. Anne stayed behind with her brother and spoke more quietly than before. According to a documented account of that private conversation, she warned the king that if the family refused to settle stewardship now, the same fight would return under every future reign. Charles did not agree openly, but he did not dismiss her warning either, and that silence gave Anne all the encouragement she needed. Anne began working within days. She gathered old correspondence, estate instructions, inventories, and overlooked custodial provisions tied to the Queen Mother's wishes. The deeper she read, the more serious the problem became. One document contained language suggesting that certain assets were never meant to fall automatically under the authority of the reigning queen consort. Camilla's title gave her rank, but not necessarily control. For Anne, the issue had become larger than one heirloom. It was now about whether memory could be protected from power itself. Months later, those words returned with devastating force, when Camilla and Anne finally faced each other again. Not across a dinner table, but after the council had made Anne's authority official. Camilla did not stay hidden in her rooms for long. Within hours, she requested a private conversation with Princess Anne. And when the two women finally stood face to face, palace formality disappeared almost immediately. There were no photographers, no council members, and no advisors between them. Camilla wanted one answer above everything else. Had Anne merely accepted the transfer, or had she quietly engineered it from the beginning? Anne agreed to meet without staff in the room. She wanted nothing said between them to be softened, repeated, or blamed on intermediaries later. Camilla entered already convinced that the princess had shaped the outcome because Anne had supplied historical material during the review. The transfer itself was now settled, but custodianship, the duty to protect and manage inherited property rather than simply own it, had become the heart of their argument. For Camilla, that distinction offered no comfort. She believed Anne had helped build the case that removed her influence. Camilla did not waste time. "Did you ask them to give it to you?" she demanded. Anne held her ground and answered that she had asked only for the Queen Mother's instructions to be respected. The Queen pushed harder, saying she had been undermined inside her own family and made to look powerless in a room where everyone already knew the outcome. Anne finally answered with equal force. Once inherited responsibility was at risk, she said, the matter stopped being personal. Then Camilla asked the question that changed the temperature of the room. Had Charles supported Anne? The princess paused. According to a documented account of that private exchange, she explained that King Charles had been shown the decisive material before the council convened. Camilla stared at her, waiting for something that would soften what came next. Nothing did. Anne said the king had not challenged the recommendation. Camilla stood abruptly. "He knew?" she asked. Anne waited several seconds before quietly answering, "Yes." That single word struck harder than the transfer itself. Camilla now understood that Charles's silence during the council session had not been confusion, hesitation, or surprise. It had been acceptance. Her husband had known where the decision was heading and had allowed her to hear it from others. For the first time, betrayal mattered more to her than losing the estate. Camilla ended the meeting before anger could turn into something worse. Anne did not stop her, and the Queen did not ask another question. The dispute between the two women had reached its limit. Now the real confrontation belonged elsewhere. Anne had answered the question Camilla feared most, but Charles still owed her the reason, and his explanation would reveal who truly held power over the estate. For all the drama surrounding Camilla's exit, the decision was never as simple as a king choosing one woman over another. The deeper shock was that Charles himself had reached the point where preserving the Queen Mother's instructions mattered more than avoiding conflict inside his marriage. When he finally spoke privately with Camilla, he did not offer an apology or promise intervention. He explained why reversing the transfer would damage something larger than either of them. Charles knew the difference mattered. The estate was bound by private instructions, custodial duties, and council-approved arrangements, meaning the sovereign could not simply move inherited assets according to personal preference. Anne had emerged as the strongest custodian because of her long involvement with family heritage and her distance from the Queen Consort's household. That distance protected the decision from appearing self-serving. Camilla understood the logic, but logic did nothing to soften the humiliation. Camilla asked him to delay implementation. Charles removed his glasses, placed them beside the estate summary, and remained silent for several seconds before answering. According to a documented account of that private conversation, the king told her the ruling reflected obligations he had inherited, not a judgment on her value as his wife. She answered immediately. He had allowed her to walk into that council chamber without knowing that her influence was about to disappear in front of Anne. Charles did not deny it. He admitted he should have warned her earlier, and the guilt in that admission was unmistakable. But he refused to attack the council or his sister simply to make the moment less painful. Camilla pushed again, asking whether he truly had no power to stop what had happened. The monarch answered that power was precisely the issue. If he ignored the old instructions for personal reasons, Every future family arrangement could become vulnerable to whoever sat closest to the throne. Then Charles revealed the provision that ended the argument. The historical instructions favored stewardship by a direct descendant who was not exercising authority through marriage to the sovereign. That condition placed Anne in a uniquely strong position and weakened Camilla's claim almost completely. The Queen fell quiet. She had entered the conversation expecting betrayal and discovered something colder. The decision had been built into the structure long before the final vote. Camilla asked one last question. Had the transfer already begun? Charles looked back at the estate summary and answered yes. Anne had already received the first inventory. The decision was no longer theoretical. The first inventory had reached her, and with it came the practical consequences that would make Camilla's loss impossible to ignore. The most painful royal defeats are not always announced with trumpets or headlines. Sometimes they arrive through smaller things. A key no longer required, an aide receiving different instructions, an inventory sent to another office. Within days of the council decision, Queen Camilla began encountering those changes one by one. The estate had moved to Anne on paper, but now the palace machinery was quietly reshaping itself around that reality. Camilla felt the shift before anyone explained it directly. Estate records, preservation instructions, and stewardship requests that once passed through her household were now being routed to Princess Anne. A new protocol, meaning a formal set of rules for how staff must handle a matter, required senior household personnel to seek Anne's approval before any listed Queen Mother asset could be moved, restored, loaned, or displayed. The change mattered because control was no longer symbolic. It now affected daily decisions inside the palace. Camilla faced that reality when an aide brought her a display proposal she would once have expected to approve herself. The aide explained that Anne's consent was now required before anything could proceed. Camilla read the paper slowly, held it for a moment, then slid it back across the desk. "Send it where it now belongs," she said. The Queen offered no further comment, but the restraint made the humiliation sharper. Anne, however, refused to treat the transfer as a personal victory. She instructed her staff never to describe the outcome in triumphant terms and blocked any unnecessary changes that might look designed to embarrass Camilla. The princess knew authority could easily become revenge, and she wanted no part of that. Still, the inventory carried one startling detail. Objects from a private sitting room associated with the Queen Mother were included, widening Anne's responsibility far beyond a few heirlooms. Camilla withdrew further when she learned how broad the inventory had become. She cancelled a planned informal appearance with other senior royals that evening, unwilling to face questions before regaining control of her emotions. Anne heard of the cancellation through palace staff and understood immediately what the transfer was costing her. For the first time, the princess seemed less concerned with defending her authority than with preventing the family wound from deepening. Then Anne made a move nobody expected. She asked Charles for a private meeting specifically about Camilla. The request was not about expanding her powers or tightening restrictions. From that moment, it was about deciding how far those powers should actually be used. Camilla believed Anne had finally secured the upper hand, but behind a closed door, the princess was preparing a decision that would completely change the emotional meaning of her victory. Princess Anne had every legal and procedural advantage now, yet victory did not sit comfortably with her. The estate had been transferred. The council had spoken. Camilla could no longer challenge the central decision. But when Anne met Charles privately, without secretaries, advisors, or council papers surrounding them, she surprised her brother. She did not ask for more authority. She asked how they could prevent the Queen Mother's legacy from becoming a weapon inside their family. Anne understood the danger immediately. If she exercised every right at once, cherished family history could become a permanent symbol of Camilla's exclusion. Charles understood that too. Custodial authority, meaning the legal responsibility to protect and manage inherited property, gave the princess control without requiring cruelty. The king admitted that Camilla had taken the transfer as a judgment on her place inside the family. Not simply as an administrative loss, Charles spoke with more regret than defensiveness. He told Anne that the family should have settled the question years earlier, before old instructions became personal weapons. According to a documented account of that private conversation, the princess answered that she would keep full authority, but allow appropriate royal use of selected items whenever preservation rules were respected. Charles thanked her, but his relief carried guilt because he knew compromise had arrived only after Camilla had already been wounded. Anne did not soften the boundary itself. Camilla could request access, she said, and those requests would be treated fairly, but the queen would no longer possess unilateral control over the queen-mother-linked estate. That distinction mattered. Compassion would shape how the rules were applied, not erase them. Charles accepted the line because he understood that reversing it would return the family to the same conflict that had caused the crisis. Anne then explained what had driven her from the Windsor dinner onward. She had never wanted the estate for status, leverage, or public recognition. Her purpose was simpler and harder. No current household should be able to rewrite inherited wishes merely because doing so was convenient. With nobody else present, she told Charles, "I'll protect what was entrusted to us. I won't use it to punish anyone." The king knew then that his sister had chosen restraint without surrender. Charles made one final decision. Camilla would hear Anne's position directly from Anne, not through another notice, secretary, or palace memorandum. The next conversation would therefore test something far more painful than ownership. Nothing about that meeting would be easy for either. That private promise transformed the dispute from a battle over possession into something far more difficult, a test of whether Camilla could accept limits without seeing them as rejection. By the following morning, the argument that began behind closed doors had escaped into public view. Commentators debated inheritance, royal rank, family loyalty, and whether Princess Anne's new position marked a deeper shift inside the monarchy. Yet none of the commentary captured public attention as powerfully as one simple moment outside Windsor. Anne arriving calmly for duty, while cameras recorded Camilla leaving through another entrance only minutes later. Anne understood immediately how powerful that contrast would become. Broadcasters framed the transfer as a clash between inherited family stewardship and the modern authority surrounding the queen consort. Custodianship, meaning the responsibility to protect and manage property without changing someone's formal royal rank, became the key distinction repeated by palace officials. Camilla remained queen. Anne had gained control over the estate. Those two facts existed together, but public debate quickly turned them into something far more personal. Camilla felt that pressure almost at once. The images from Windsor were replayed through the day, with Anne arriving for duty, while the Queen's vehicle was shown leaving through another gate only minutes later. The contrast became the story. A fictional newspaper front page pushed the drama even further, with photographs of both women beneath one stark headline: "The estate passes to Anne." Coverage focused heavily on Camilla walking out of the council session, turning one private reaction into a public symbol of defeat. Anne hated that interpretation. She watched the television coverage only briefly, before commentators began saying she had defeated Camilla. The princess switched the screen off. She had fought for the Queen Mother's wishes to be protected, not for her sister-in-law to be humiliated. Yet the more restrained Anne remained, the more the public treated her silence as confidence. Camilla, meanwhile, was being judged by a single angry exit she could no longer take back. Then the tone shifted. Camilla received a private message from Anne explaining that family access would still be protected where appropriate, even though the council's transfer would remain completely intact. According to a documented account of that exchange, the princess made clear that authority would not be used as punishment. Camilla read the message once, then again. She did not tear it up, dismiss it, or send an angry answer. Camilla instead asked for a private meeting. Anne agreed. The public had already chosen its dramatic version of the story, but the true ending would take place without cameras, when Camilla and Anne finally decided what the transfer would mean between them. There would be no reversal, no secret compromise restoring the old arrangement, no last-minute royal intervention, allowing everyone to pretend the confrontation never happened. When Queen Camilla and Princess Anne finally met again, both women entered knowing the central fact could not change. The Queen Mother's estate had passed into Anne's custodianship. What remained undecided was whether that transfer would permanently fracture the family or force both women to accept a truth neither had wanted to face. Anne spoke first and made the position clear. She had accepted custodianship permanently, meaning the duty to protect, manage, and preserve inherited property according to the conditions attached to it. She would honor every obligation connected to the Queen Mother's estate. Camilla did not challenge her. The Queen acknowledged that she would no longer control those assets, and, for the first time since the crisis began, she did not ask for the decision to be delayed, weakened, or reversed. Camilla then admitted what had truly wounded her. According to a documented account of their private conversation, storming out of the council chamber had never been mainly about losing property. She had felt blindsided and diminished in front of people whose acceptance had taken years to earn. Anne listened without interrupting. When the Queen finished, the princess told her that protecting inherited wishes was never meant to erase her present role. Camilla could remain queen without possessing every royal legacy that had existed before her. Anne did not celebrate the concession, and Camilla did not offer an apology wrapped in ceremony. Their understanding was quieter than that. The Queen finally rose to leave, paused, and said, "Then look after it properly." Anne answered, "I will." There was no embrace and no sudden friendship, but there was respect. This time, Camilla left without anger, and the ending carried more weight than the storm out that had begun everything. Charles later learned how the meeting had ended through a private account given to him by Anne. The king understood that something important had changed. The transfer had created a new family boundary. Inherited stewardship would no longer be confused with personal rank. Anne had gained authority without turning it into revenge. Camilla had lost control without losing her place. Charles had learned that avoiding conflict could cause deeper wounds than confronting difficult truths early. What began with a chair pushed back in anger ends with a door closing quietly, and with Princess Anne holding not simply an estate, but the responsibility to protect a piece of royal history without allowing it to tear the living family apart. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.